morning, everybody. Such a pleasure to be here this morning to be presenting to you live from my home in Dublin to wherever you are in your home or your office across Romania or Europe. I'm going to get stuck into it because we're conscious of a tight agenda that the team here are trying to run. I want to talk to you about what I'm seeing in the market that is changing, particularly over the last 4 to 5 months as a result of the pandemic. So hopefully everybody can see my screen and that's showing okay. If you don't have any problems seeing the screen or hearing me, please just jump into the chat. So let's get started. I want to take you through the changes in recruiting by looking at the recruiting funnel, the process and stages of recruiting from kind of attraction at the top where you have employer branding and sourcing all the way down to offer and interview, and talk about what's changed, how it's changed, what that means for you. So if we look at the start, I want to talk to you about branding and attraction. I want to ask you a question first of all. If I was to ask you, if you were a pilot and you have been, let's say, you've had a year off and I get you 2 job offers. You have interviewed with Lufthansa and you've interviewed with Ryanair. Now, these job offers are both really good. And actually, you really liked all of the employees in Ryanair and Lufthansa that you met. But you kind of liked the Ryanair employees a bit more. And the offer was just that little bit better. They're paying a few thousand extra and the terms and conditions are slightly better. You've now got to make a decision and you've got to go home and tell your partner, your family, your friends, which job you took. Which job will you take, Lufthansa or Ryanair? Jump into the chat and let me know, what is your opinion? If you were a pilot and you're faced with this decision, you've been made 2 offers, Lufthansa or Ryanair. You liked both of them, but you kind of had better money from Ryanair and better terms and conditions from Ryanair. What would you think? Georgiana has said she believes she would go with Lufthansa. Alexandra is saying that she would go with Ryanair. Adrian, Lufthansa. Adina, Lufthansa. Oh, who else? Julia is saying Lufthansa. Delia, Giannina, Andrea. We have a lot of people voting for Lufthansa. We have only 2 people out of, I think, 20 so far have said Ryanair. Okay, I think I understand your sentiment. And this is really interesting. And this is a really important fact when we think about employer branding, is that candidates accept job offers, not based on the facts. The facts are the Ryanair offer is better money, better terms and conditions, and I prefer to them. But most of us are saying that we would still choose Lufthansa because when we make a decision, we make it with emotion. And when we go home to the people we love most, the people who we respect, we want them to respect us. And we think, for whatever reason, Ryanair is not the employer we want to tell people we are going to go work with. We would rather say Lufthansa, even though technically on all levels, the Ryanair offer is better and we prefer that company. That's really important when we think about employer branding, because employer branding isn't about who is the best employer and you prove it. Employer branding is and has always been about emotions. It's changed over the many years that since employer branding kind of came to being. When I started in recruiting 20 odd years ago, we didn't talk about employer branding. It wasn't a thing. You took jobs based on the salary, the role, and the location. But as the internet grew and we could see inside of organizations, we became convinced that the companies we should go work for have beautiful offices. And then in the tech era, it was about beautiful offices and lots of benefits like beers in the fridge and foosball tables and ping pong. But I believe today we live in a world where faking employer brand is very hard. Because as a company, you cannot control all of the elements. People can see what you are really like on social media, on sites like Glassdoor and others, and you have to live through your values. And people's values have changed through the pandemic. One of the most important things to realize about employer branding right now is that your organization's actions are going to be remembered a long time. So let me contrast 2 different organizations. One is EasyJet. EasyJet announced last month that they were laying off 30% of their staff. This is not unusual. Many companies have laid off staff, unfortunately, and many airlines have done so as well. But why EasyJet got the attention of the media is because allegedly 2 days before these layoffs, their CEO had sent a really supportive message to all employees, thanking them for their support, saying we're in this together, et cetera, et cetera. And so the employees felt that having 30% of their colleagues laid off so soon after such a message was just inappropriate. And they felt really bad about it. And they started talking about it online. And the media picked it up and made it into a bad story. So people are going to remember this as a negative way. Their emotional connection to EasyJet, whatever it was before the pandemic, has been tarnished by the actions of the organization during the pandemic. In the UK, JD Wetherspoons, the pub and bar chain, did the same. They got into terrible press because they weren't paying their staff when they shut down. Airbnb laid off 25% of its workforce. Again, the potential of a very negative story. But different to EasyJet, how they actually delivered the message changed the world's perception of Airbnb massively. Their CEO put a message out there that was very transparent and very honest about how upset he was having to lay off the staff, but he explained it rationally. And he also spoke about how the organization was trying to help their staff. What they were doing was they were going to put a list together of all of the staff that would be laid off with their contact details and their skills in the hope that other people would try and hire them. And everything they did around that clarity, the actions they took, left a very positive emotional feeling in the world around Airbnb. So again, when I say what your actions will be remembered, you may still do as an organization, you may still do negative things. You have to lay off staff and do negative things. But how you communicate and how you do that is really, really important because values have changed. People are insecure, they're nervous, and they want to work for employers that have the right values because we have all woken up to the fact that we are all human, we are all the same, and we've become very emotionally charged in the last 4 months. And that means that the things that organizations may have done 6 months ago that we would have let them away with, we would have ignored, we will not ignore today. And we'll be very passionate to criticize a company if they do it incorrectly, but if they do it right, we're also very, very keen to get behind that company and support them. So it's really, really important to remember that. The second thing I want to point out, which is hopefully experienced by many of you on the call here this morning, is that in the second phase of the process, sourcing just became really easy. I have had a lot of people reach out to me since the start of the pandemic, beginning in January in Asia, telling me it's never been a better time to reach talent because more and more people were working from home, working remotely, and therefore had time and had privacy to talk to recruiters, which is fantastic. The challenge is here that it would make you think that recruiting is going to get easier. It hasn't. It, in fact, you could argue has got harder. So it is easier to reach talent. So a lot of organizations have taken advantage of this and they are pipelining talent. They are contacting people to understand when would you move, why would you move, what job would you look for, because it is a good time to do that. Or they're reaching out to people to regret them for previous applications to try and make sure that the candidate experience is tight. So that's a positive in the process, the ability to do that. But we have been challenged further down the pipe with interviewing, for example. We are, nearly all of us, I think, having to do video interviews to replace in person. And this is great. It's most of us have got used to this. We've understood how to do it better. But there are big issues involved. There are issues over bias. So for example, when you do a video interview like this, you are in my home right now. Welcome to my house. But if I'm a candidate, perhaps this is my kitchen and my children are running around behind me. And that is information that you should not have and you should not be using to make a decision on the candidate's application. And you will say, well, I won't do that. But it's very hard to ignore these things. For example, do they have a very messy kitchen? Do they have a busy kitchen? Do they have a huge kitchen? Do they have beautiful things in their kitchen? Do they have old, dirty things in their kitchen? You will notice these things, and they aren't part of the assessment process. But subconsciously, you may use that information to try and assess that candidate. So you have to be very, very careful. Perhaps recommending that your candidates use backgrounds to try and block themselves out, to make sure there's nothing else around, a neutral background. These are things we have to help our audience with. But also making sure that they're more comfortable in this surrounding Making someone do a live interview, for example, at 4 o'clock in the middle of the pandemic when their children may have been at home, perhaps isn't fair. It's not the same as coming into a room in your office and doing a private interview. So there's many issues we have to consider when we think about video interviewing. But despite the fact it's been easy to get candidates and reach them, and typically we're interviewing them faster, it's never been harder to get candidates to commit. Candidates are not willing to commit to new jobs. And this is a big challenge because they are fearful of starting a new company, being the new in a new company, being the new employee. And we've issues in many countries and regions where staff have been furloughed or subsidized by the government. There's a belief that that will go on forever, and therefore they're not willing to accept new jobs. So we have all sorts of challenges around the offer level of the recruiting process. And the psychology of this suggests that people would rather be unhappy than uncertain. And uncertainty is everywhere. Will we go back into lockdown? Is this finished? Will I get sick? Will I not? Will I lose my job? And you got to remember that there's this thing called the status quo bias, which means that we have a default preference to leave everything the same, to stay in the same job, even though we're unhappy in that job, even though we never liked it, we've been treated poorly. You have to have a job that is at least twice as attractive for someone to get over that status quo bias. Any change from that baseline is perceived as a loss. And this is a big issue for talent. So research indicates, though, that a fear of change, which is quite natural, is one of the single most career limiting moves you can make. So we need to be able to work with candidates to overcome these challenges. And this is one of the issues if you're recruiting in-house or if you're working in a recruiting agency and you're trying to convince your client thinks recruiting is easy right now. There's higher unemployment, more talent available. Oh, and look, you can reach people by phone really easily. And those things are true, but when you get to the bottom of the funnel, it's so much more difficult to convince people. So you typically have more people in your funnel, which can be more work for you to disposition or regret candidates, to say no to people, deal with a higher volume. And then when you do have a short list of people you're interested in, or you have the one candidate you want to offer, it's very difficult to get them to go to take that job. So the fear of the unknown, family issues, relocation issues. Do you have an office for me to go to? Uncertainty. What will the timelines be? These are all the difficult, typical barriers to change. They would be the barriers normally, and they are heightened right now. And you need to be more empathetic. And that's really, really important. And you've also got to remember that there are issues with regard to different countries and rights about your legal rights as a new employee versus established employee. I know in Ireland, for example, if you're a new employee in your first year, you have significantly less employment rights than when you go past that first year anniversary. So again, think about legal issues like that may affect someone's decision. But how to get around this is to always be closing. Preparation is key. You have to understand the why somebody might be fearful. And the time to ask why is not when you're making the offer. To do this correctly, you need to be always closing throughout the process. Okay, so you need to understand the why from the start with all of the candidates perhaps that you're interviewing. Why might you not move jobs? Are you fearful? What are your concerns? Getting to the deep why. And when you understand perhaps your own organization or your client's organization more, and you can perhaps find people who have had the same concerns, it's easier to address those concerns because we are much more influenced by peers. I'm going to show you an example from Danone in a second about how they're using peer influence in their employer branding on their new site, which is about to go live in a second. But sharing stories from our top performers from our staff. Here is Anna. She joined our team recently. She also has small children and she has this issue and concern. Why don't I connect you with her? Or let me tell you her story. They are things that can ease tension, or connecting your potential candidates with some of your team to say, hey, why don't you talk to them? Here's somebody we hired 3 months ago at the start of the pandemic, and they have had a great experience. They were also concerned and fearful. Why don't you have a private conversation with them and come back to me? So again, trying to address those concerns early in the process is really, really important, but always be closing throughout the process. It creates more work for you because you have to pre-close everybody, not just the last person you want to offer. But it means that when you get to offer stage, you have already uncovered their concerns and hopefully addressed them, and you move on. But I'll go back and mention that peer influence piece. We are very influenced by our peers in terms of the candidate experience. And this is what Danone have done with their new career site. And it's quite smart because they're asking you as a candidate to enter their career site through any of these individuals you see here. And it takes you on a journey to understand their company and their vacancies. And what they've done is they've leveraged the fact that we want to be associated with people we think are like us. So I could look at this and I could see people's job titles and go with marketing, for example. I'm a marketeer, so I'll listen to Sue's story. Or maybe it's that I see in somebody here, someone who looks more like me, female, male, Asian, European, white, black. Again, you will find the person that for whatever reason is closest to you, and you will follow the journey through that person, and you will therefore have more trust. And it's a very simple but easy way to try and build trust through that peer influence piece. But you got to get candidates over the line, understand what is their career problem, understand when to talk about money as well. And that's a big part of the negotiation process. But it doesn't end there, right? When you have somebody who's accepted a job, you have to think about before they start, how do we onboard that person, which is really difficult. There's a whole load of issues at the moment. Where will they actually be physically working? Okay, so how does that work? Relocation. Are they going to relocate now or later? What hardware are we going to give them? If they're going to work remotely, how do I give them a laptop? How can I ship it to them? If they're going to use their own laptop, can they get onto our network? Can they access Wi-Fi from their area? And there's many tactics, and I don't have time to go through them all, but we'll share these slides with all the attendees. And there's some simple things you can do in terms of, making sure you have a checklist for remote onboarding, making sure you've set expectations about what will or won't happen. You're honest, transparent, allow them to meet the team virtually, perhaps. Lots of different ways that you can manage that. And you got to remember that onboarding is a very important part of the process for an employee. Ben Horowitz, the famous venture capitalist, says that a lot of companies think their employees are so smart they require no training. That's silly. But when you're a remote worker, you can't just arrive in the office and expect people to help you. It has to be very, very deliberate. And managers aren't necessarily ready for that. They need to really get involved in training, developing, and deciding on the metrics for success of an employee in their first week, their first month, their first 90 days. These are super important. And it isn't about using, tools that can monitor their laptops, watch their screens, or watch what they're doing. It's about proper KPIs to really look at performance management. Because working from home for most of us is being forced upon us. Maybe we want to continue this way, but maybe we don't. And lots of surveys would show you that, people don't all want to work from home. In different parts of the world, in different jobs, they want to get back to the office. And they want to understand what that means to them. Communication, culture, grievances, all those issues have to be handled differently. But if you're hiring, you need to be able to address those issues up front and put people at ease. I have a lot of issues I wanted to try and just touch on very lightly for you in this short time we had this morning. But if I can summarize, employer branding is more important, I think, than ever right now during the pandemic. But people's reasons for taking a job may have changed. It's never been easier to reach potential talent, but it's never been harder to get that talent to commit to a new job. And as much as possible, I recommend you use your own team and colleagues as social proof to allay their concerns. Be prepared for virtual onboarding. Don't leave this to the morning they start. Have a good plan in place, as that will ease your candidate and make it easier. And make sure that the managers who will be working with these talents when they join the company understand that communication is key to allaying the concerns of a new employee, and that they have a really, really important part to play. So hopefully that's given you some tips and advice to set you up for the day. I'm going to hand back to Gabor, and thank you all for your time. And we'll definitely have questions in our session later on.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Thank you very much for the start. And I think it's many meaningful and soulful things in your presentation. Unfortunately, I have only one question what I can express to you because of the time pressure. If you can give us one advice as a recruitment leader, what could be if I want to improve or prepare for the closer future myself in the recruitment industry? What is your advice for the Romanian market?
So my advice as a leader is to realize that candidate experience is going to be very, very important. And you're going to be very busy with inbound applications for less roles. So your volume just went up. So you need to solve a way to still give a really good quality, transparent experience to candidates. Because if lots of people are applying for you, you've less jobs and less time and resources to deal with them. Not replying to them, not getting back to them will damage you massively in the long run. And in a year, 2 years, when you're back hiring at scale, those people will remember the horrible experience they had not hearing from you. So try and solve that today, fast, preferably with technology, some good process that's going to basically work on that candidate experience. So don't just focus on the fact that maybe you're under-resourced, understaffed, and therefore you can't treat people the same and think, well, you know, people should be happy to have a job. This will change and go back to a growth market very quickly in a year and a half, 2 years. And those people will remember your actions today. So make sure you're proud of how you act with the talent you're dealing with today, so that in the future, this will stand to you and your organization.